All right, welcome back, everyone. Next up we have Chris Verlainen. Chris is the lead for the jBPM project for Business Process Management. And Chris is basically going to give us an update on where we're at with BPM and the new features and so forth, and a demo. Yes? Yep. All right, so take it away. Thank you very much, Chris.
All right. Thanks, Phil. My name is Chris Verlainen. So I'm the jBPM project lead. So I lead the community project, but also the Red Hat JBoss BPM Suite product architect. So I mean, as Mark already explained, our product is based on our community, so it's the same team. We're kind of distributing our attention on both, obviously. And I'll give an overview on kind of the new things that are coming with jBPM and anything BPM related in version 7. I'll use mostly case management as kind of like to build a story. But as I'll explain in a few slides, a lot of the things that I'll be explaining aren't specifically about case management. So I'm going to explain case management as it's like a new topic which has a lot of attention. But it's really, for us, it's not really something completely different. And so a lot of the features I'll be showing while I'll be explaining a lot in the context of a case management application, a lot of it is actually very generic. If you're doing more traditional BPM, and I'll probably highlight some of the features, some of the other additional features that we've been working on as well for the 7 series. But basically, they all apply on BPM and case management. But just to give you an overview, so I'll start with first explaining what we believe case management is and what we're kind of doing to help you use our product in context of case management. And doing that, I'll focus on the different areas. So I mean, it's the entire life cycle of a process or a case. Goes from there's obviously the execution, which we refer to it like a core engine or the core features that our platform has for executing these kind of capabilities. So we've done a lot of work there to kind of make that more powerful. But you obviously have to create those cases. So on the authoring side, there's things that have changed. You need to monitor those cases. On the runtime side, there are things that have been changed. And in the end, I want to kind of focus on custom applications. I guess the main reason is that, I mean, what our customers are currently doing today already is they're using BPM as a technology to build their own applications. So this is actually where probably most of the people in the room are actually thinking about. I mean, we need to develop applications that provide value. Our customers have always been doing that, but we want to, and maybe in the early series, if we're thinking about jBPM, well, even probably jBPM 3, like early versions of jBPM 5, there's a lot of attention on like the technology. What can we do with the technology to provide you these kind of capabilities? Nowadays, we're going much further, as in we're trying to bridge the gap and actually help you build the applications with our technology rather than saying like, we're just providing you technology. You figure out how to build the applications yourself. So I'll focus on that. And there's going to be a demo part. The demo part is going to be the first thing in the afternoon. So I guess this hour will mostly focus on just slides and explaining most of the concepts. I'll delegate some of the actual explanation of how things look and how things work towards the demo in the afternoon. So first of all, what is case management? I'm not going to give a definition. I guess there is no clear definition of actually what case management is. I actually looked it up in some standards regarding to case management. Even they don't really give a good explanation of what case management is. It's kind of like, I mean, going back to how BPM defining what a process is, it's just as difficult. But for us, case management, it's actually this step where if you look at traditional BPM, and I'll call this a structured process, you're typically just defining business logic in a well-structured way. And that's typically also the advantage that you get by doing that is you're going to describe exactly how your application should behave under specific circumstances. And you're going to literally say, okay, first this needs to happen. And once that is finished, then we need to do this other task. And then we need to do things in parallel. And if an error occurs, this needs to happen, etc. And you can define that completely from start to finish, exactly how it should behave. It is a well-structured process, and we can execute that. The engine can just say, like, okay, I'm just going to follow this recipe from start to finish. That works well in things where, if you're interacting with lots of machines or there's a very predefined flow that you need to follow, that's pretty easy to do, and that's what traditional BPM has been doing for ages. If you look more towards case management, we're actually stepping away from this pretty well-defined set of steps that you need to follow. Things become much more adaptive. And by adaptive, I mean, so rather than literally just following the steps, there's always a possibility you're going to deviate a little bit. Initially, it might not be just do whatever you want, but it might just be like, okay, we'll give you the option to choose. You can choose whether you want to do this or that. Or maybe we're saying you should be doing that, but you're going to say, like, I disagree, I'm going to do something else anyway, even though it's not defined as part of the process. So that's what we would call more adaptive cases. And the extreme form of that is what we call a dynamic case. A dynamic case would be there's nothing predefined. You're just an empty slate. You just start working on something. You'll figure it out while you do it. So with complete dynamic case management, you would basically just start a case. It's empty. We're not giving you any recommendation of what you should be doing. You can just dynamically start doing things for the case, and over time you can actually learn. Like if you're always doing the same task after a specific thing happened, we can start learning. That's actually the dynamic version. But as you can see, this is like there's a spectrum here, right? So you can start with a structured process and add some adaptive and dynamic capabilities into it, or you can start with a blank slate and then start defining some of the logic that is reoccurring. Some examples that you can see, I mean, in the context of case management are things like claim processing. So, I mean, there's like an insurance, you have an issue, you call someone up, and you need to provide information. There needs to be someone who's going to check that. So there's lots of steps you need to do, but they're not like predefined, as in there's a certain order you need to do things in. But if there's a check and something happens, then maybe someone else needs to come, etc. Same with issue reporting. Something goes wrong. It really depends on what happens continuously to kind of keep track of what you're doing. And then finally, patient treatment. Here you can actually see that the healthcare industry is kind of trying to standardize some of this. They call it care plans, etc. So they're trying to standardize some of the treatment of patients. But on the other hand, it is something where the physician always needs to be in control. I mean, there's not going to be a process that says you need to do this, and then the physician has no option of not doing this. The physician is always the one, what we call in this context, the knowledge worker. He has the knowledge. He's the one who's in control. While we might provide guidance and help, he's the one who's going to be making the decisions. So what are the kind of characteristics that you see that are different in comparison with more traditional BPM? One is that and these are characteristics that you might see. I'm not saying that every case needs to have these characteristics, but if you have any of these, then you're typically moving more towards case management. The first one is ad hoc and dynamic. So ad hoc would mean that we will give you the choice of ad hoc. So while you're executing the case, to kind of make a decision and say, like, okay, ad hoc, I can make a decision to now choose between one of these options, for example. And dynamic would be to kind of decide something that's not predefined at all. So like I said earlier, pure dynamic cases, just do something even though it's not even predefined. Dynamically add it in the context of that case. Another thing that usually happens with cases is that they're more data-driven. Processes are typically more flow-driven. Obviously, you can have processes that are very data-driven. Same, you could have cases that are more flow-driven. But in general, they're more data-driven. The main reason is that what you're going to do next is typically more depending on what the data is you're looking at than where you are in your case. If you're doing like issue reporting, claim processing, you're literally just going to look at, okay, what are the documents that I have? What am I missing? What do I need to move forward? So it's more data-driven. It's more just going to look at, okay, what do I need? What information do I have to then decide what you're going to do next? And as I said, then finally, knowledge workers. So in this context, we kind of assume there's people who have a lot of knowledge that we want to help. So we don't want to take over their place. We don't want to replace them. We want to basically give them the opportunity. We want to give them recommendations. We want to make their life easier, but not prevent them from doing anything they want to do. So that's where we give them the power, even though we will try to do as much as possible to help them in making those decisions. And then, so the way we see case management is we see this complete spectrum that we will try to support. So I guess this might be different from what maybe traditionally has been done, where case management was more like a separate set of applications or a separate product that you could buy and run in parallel with your BPM. So we don't see it like that. So we can see actually completely structured processes or completely dynamic cases, but there's this spectrum in between, and you can choose how much of these capabilities you need. And so we believe that there's actually no line between where a process ends and where a case would start. So I don't even want to try and define where that would lie, because I don't think there is one. I think there's just basically these kind of capabilities, and the more you start using some of these advanced capabilities, the more you're going towards what people typically identify as case management. But there's no line where you can say like, well, this is a process. As soon as you do this, you need to transform to a case. Yes.
Yeah, but are these two orthogonal things? Because isn't the case the subject of the process? It's almost like a case object which is floating through the process.
Yeah. So
I don't know if you can. I mean, there's no need to define a line between them. Is what I would think.
no. So they absolutely work together, as in you can define that some of the things that you're doing are a case, which might be, I mean, it has certain capabilities, like I mentioned, if it's data driven, we want to actually have what we call a case folder, case file, where we collect that information. And then in the context of that case, you can be running certain well-structured processes. So they interact very well. But on the other hand, let's assume you start with a very well-structured process and all of a sudden decide at some point you need to add some more adaptive capabilities, because at that point there needs to be more flexibility. We will not tell you, oh, no, start over, you need to implement it as a case then. No, we're just going to say like, well, just add more capabilities there. And you can evolve. You don't have to, I guess the challenge with using two different solutions would be like, oh, damn, I made the wrong decision. I thought it was a structured process. It's not. Now I have to redo it all. We don't see it that way. We just see it as like, no, I mean, just start using more advanced capabilities. And so anything that goes beyond what like BPMN 2 would out of the box define, we would start saying like these are case management capabilities. BPMN 2 is purely focused on, almost only purely focused on more traditional, well-structured BPM. And then the other reason why I think there's a spectrum is that we're actually seeing some of the features we're introducing in this context for case management. We don't believe they're unique to case management, and you kind of pointed to that as well. A lot of the features are just as useful in normal traditional BPM processes as well. A typical example is case roles. So with case roles, we're going to try and keep track of who you're participating with. So you're going to say, okay, this is the one who initiated the case, but he's working in the context of an IT support person, and that's a QE contact, etc. So the case is going to try and keep track of who you're collaborating with. That is just as useful in a traditional BPM process. The only reason why it's currently not implemented in some of the other BPM vendors is that it's, for example, not part of the BPM 2 spec. There's no way of defining that kind of logic. But a lot of the features we do, we believe that just as applicable to more structured processes as well. So, and that's why I say a lot of that, even though most of the story that I'm going to be telling here is about case management, the kind of things we're doing to support that better, these features are probably, a lot of these are probably applicable if you're just doing more traditional BPM and you don't really need some of the more advanced capabilities. You're going to get benefit out of a lot of these features as well. And so what to expect? So I guess this is kind of the remainder of the presentation is going to be about how did we extend the capabilities we have currently to support this better. So I guess at the center we have the core BPM engine that we've had ever since the project was created. So I'll be explaining how we extended that engine with more capabilities to support the kind of.
What is your level of support for CMMN?
I'll get back to that later. So the second is then, okay, we've got the modeling capabilities. We got a BPMN 2 based process modeler designer that you already saw. So we've extended that with more capabilities to, for example, be able to define case roles, to be able to use milestones and stages, etc. But we also have another story, which is for cases, and then mostly targeting unstructured cases towards dynamic cases. We believe that that kind of visualization is not ideal, and I'll explain what we have in mind in the future to kind of bridge that gap. Then on the monitoring side, so The full life cycle obviously includes that you need to monitor your processes and your cases. So we've done extensions there. Some of them are generic, but we actually have a showcase, a case management showcase, where you can manage your cases, and that'll have support for these kind of case management capabilities that we've introduced in the engine, so you can keep track of your milestones, et cetera, as well. And then finally, custom applications. So like I mentioned, this is what all of our customers are currently doing. They're building applications, and they're using our platform to enable them to do that. And what we try to do is to kind of keep making that easier and easier. I mean, we don't want to tell you how to build applications. That's not our. But we want to give you options to make it easier and easier for you to do that. So I'll explain that we kind of have like things like building blocks that you can start reusing. We have a lot of work on our execution service, got a remote API, a REST API that you can use. Using that API from your custom applications makes it very easy to kind of focus on visualizing data, et cetera, but leaving all the hard work to the BPM platform underneath. So I'll explain a lot about that. And actually, Alex's talk will be about building applications as well. So I'll just focus on the case management part there. All right, so first, core features. What we've done is we've looked at the kind of use cases and the kind of capabilities you need to do case management. The CMMN spec, has been mentioned before, is definitely a source for that. But obviously, there's lots of case management products out there. It's not a new thing. And to be honest, a lot of the capabilities I'll be talking about, we've kind of had these capabilities ever since jBPM 5. We had a lot of ad hoc dynamic capabilities in the engine in version 5 already. Although I probably have to admit that some of them might not have always been very easy to use, as in you kind of needed to know some of the internals to make efficient use of that. So we've been working on extending the capabilities of the engine and make it easier to use as well. And so there's different things we've done. So I guess it is obviously just first supporting new constructs like case roles, what's a case role, how can you use it, et cetera, and then making sure that the engine can execute it, but also on how you can consume these. So maybe some of the capabilities were already there. We've just spent a lot of time on making sure that it's now very easy for you to use that feature, whether it's from in your application or while you're defining these cases, etc. So I'm listing some of these. I can't go into detail and explain, the details of each of those new features, but I kind of made 4 different categories to try and explain. So the first one is the ad hoc fragments and the dynamic tasks. So that's something that we've had for a while, but we kind of have made it much easier to use. So that's about the flexibility, the adaptiveness. What it allows you to do is to rather than having a completely structured process, it allows you to have process fragments and options that you can represent to the people that are managing the case. So when you're managing the case, you can actually see, and I'll explain with a picture maybe in a few slides. You can actually give options that maybe a user can decide which of those options he will choose, or there might be a rule who's going to automatically trigger some of those options in specific situations, etc. And dynamic tasks is the ability to, while you're executing a case or a process, to dynamically do things in that context as well. So you decide, I need to do something else. I need to do a new task within the context. You can dynamically add that task. It's not just a task. You can dynamically add human tasks, service tasks, or call another process dynamically within the context of that case. The next is more related to context. So case file I already mentioned. Data is usually a lot more important in the context of case management. Again, data is nothing new. Processes can keep track of data. So you can put any kind of data from simple data types like dates and numbers to custom Java objects, custom objects with whatever you want to model, to documents and any kind of information can actually be stored in a context and can now also be stored in the case file. The main difference with the case file is just going to be one case file across the entire case. So whether you're executing other cases within that case, whether you're executing other processes, once you write to the case file, it's visible to have anything in the context of that case. So it's literally a folder all the data related to the case goes in there. You can use it anywhere inside that case. Another thing is milestone and stages. So especially if your case starts to be less structured, then it's more difficult to keep track of where you are. And milestones and stages are two slightly different ways of visualizing where you are at the moment. So milestones are well, I'll start with stages. Stages are actually kind of more like blocks that you're in one stage. When you complete that, you go to the next stage, or you can actually have multiple stages active in parallel as well. They're kind of like blocks in the execution of your case, where it's like, I'm now in this stage or phase, and then I move on to the next, and then typically I have different options. While you're in this stage, you have certain options. In another, while the next stage activates, all of a sudden new options do appear. Milestones are slightly different, as in they're not really block structured. They literally just allow you to identify certain points. Like if I reach this point, then I know I've reached this milestone. So I can notify the user, for example, to say like, this is a milestone we've reached. We're now trying to, for example, continue and reach the next milestone. So if you want to look at the current status of your case, you can, by looking at the milestones, get a quick idea of where you are in the case. Case roles, case comments, and task assignment is all about collaboration. So cases are a lot about multiple people collaborating. So case roles, you can keep track of who you're collaborating with. You can leave comments on the case. And task assignment, I'll get back to that as well. We allow you quite advanced task assignment to figure out who should be doing certain tasks. And then finally, this is more technical. We do allow you to, we have a case life cycle, so you can open a case, close a case, reopen a case, etc. And there's some advances that if you're familiar with the session strategies we have in version 5 and version 6, well, in version 6 actually, so we now have a per case session strategy, so you're going to reuse the same session for anything related to that case. And we have a case identifier, which is like a business key. We have support for business keys already. The case identifier allows you to kind of define unique identifiers in the context of that case. Yes? Yep.
The other thing is organization needs to be modeled, because one important thing in case management is escalation, which is of course a standard structured processing, but that could be an out-of-the-box feature. So if I would propose, the three things I would propose here is operator as a core feature, organization, and escalation. Those are three things which appear to be missing, but I'm sure you guys have given thought to it.
Yeah, so case roles, actually, there's even, so with case roles, there's even authorization linked to that. So certain roles could have privileges to execute certain things where other, like if you're just collaborating, you can't close the case. The author, for example, might not. But that's I mean, configurable. Case roles are definitely linked to task assignment. So if you're assigning a task, you can assign it to the user who's filling that role within your case, not just anyone who has these kind of capabilities. Even and task assignment with skills, etc. I'll definitely get back to that as well. The organizational model is not something that we provide out of the box, like that we would provide you an option to model your organization. But so escalation is supported, and you can actually go and query any organizational model you have. So what we typically see is customers have like an LDAP environment where a lot of this is already modeled. So we don't want to, I mean, we integrate with something like that, where you can use that information, like find my supervisor, find so that kind of capabilities. Out of the box, we would not allow you to model this. So we actually integrate with other technology that would help us to get access to that information. But I agree, it's definitely something. I mean, and it's something that maybe in the future we can extend our support. Yeah.
So a patient presents for treatment, and what happened is the internal medicine physician is looking at it, but then he needs to refer the patient for some more specialized consultant to a cardiologist. So that becomes a sub-case, which the cardiology has its own flow, but it's linked to the main case.
Yeah, so I mean, you have two options when you start a case within a case, which is either as a in the context of the case, which would be a sub-case. You could also basically just link it, where it's going to be a separate case, so more independent, but they would be linked. So they, Well, so if you really want to have the one case file where the other case is going to put data into the same case file, then it's a subcase. You definitely, yeah. All right. So how do we implement that? So I mean, we have a flexible BPMN2 engine. Well, since version 5, basically. And a lot of that is a lot of these kind of capabilities are already possible. If you look at BPMN2, it's got the concept of the ad hoc subprocess. So you can already do things like ad hoc and dynamic tasks, etc. Some of the things simply are not directly supported, like case roles, but they can easily be added as a meta-driven extension. So you can actually extend the spec with custom properties. Since they don't immediately affect the execution, this is the recommended way that the specification actually defines. So we do use some of these additional capabilities are simply implemented as part of as meta-driven extensions in the BPMN2 file. If you're familiar with case management and CMMN, so CMMN is a fairly recent standard case management model annotation. So it's it's got the same ideas, and it's actually very related to BPMN. But it wants to be the same for BPMN was for workflow and business processes. So it wants to be the same. So CMMN would like to be the standard for case management. Currently, we do support a lot of the capabilities that are described in that spec. We do not currently support the underlying format. So there's the standard defines a CMMN serialization format, an XML format. Currently, we do not support that directly. The main reasons, and if you want to have more detailed discussion, is that it's actually based on, so it's actually taking a lot of the concepts that are in BPMN2. I mean, they took that as the starting point for CMMN. But there's a lot of things you can already do in BPMN that CMMN is maybe then going to do slightly different, etc. So there's a lot of similarities, yet it's different. The other thing is that the solution it suggests, if you draw a CMMN diagram, ends up usually being very complex. I mean, and then that's my personal opinion. Anyone can have his own opinion, but I think what you end up with CMMN is very complex processes, even much more complex than what BPMN offers, and that has been, that's a long-standing criticism that BPMN itself is not easy to understand always as well. And then finally, what I already mentioned, this spectrum, and this is probably the main reason. We don't want to force you into choosing whether you're doing a process or a case, and then choose one of the standards, and then be stuck with that format for the rest of the development. We want you to be able to switch, simply just use these features whenever you need them. We are in discussion with the CMMN working group. So for example, on BPM Next, there's a lot of interest in CMMN as well. So actually, probably almost everyone agrees that we need to figure out how to merge them more into one spec, rather than keep them as separate, but that's not done yet. So while we definitely would invite, we are trying to be part of that communication to kind of merge these two more into a standard that you can use across the board. At this point, and maybe in the future, if CMMN becomes a widely adopted spec, we will probably, we can still add support for the XML format directly, but at this point, we don't directly support it. Then a little bit, so this is not specific to case management. This is more about the architecture that we have underneath that I definitely wanted to mention as well, because we're talking about core features. So if you've been using the platform in previous series, this is kind of like how you could set up your architecture. These are components that all were available. We have the workbench, it's got different names, the workbench for the authoring capabilities, the monitoring capabilities. So the console management, this is the monitoring capabilities and execution, and that's the authoring side. They're combined into one app out of the box. And then we also have what we call the key server, execution servers. You can set those up to do the execution. In version 6, we actually had embedded execution servers. So these were part of the web application. So if you were executing something in the console, it was literally just delegating to the engines that were embedded inside this application. Or you could decide to kind of just use remote APIs and execute on separate servers. The application kind of evolved to what we would now currently recommend our customers to do as well, which is rather than just embedding it inside the application itself is just to use execution servers and delegate all execution to these servers. So when you're authoring, when you're creating a new project and you're done, you will basically say like, okay, I'm ready. I want to build and deploy this project. Now this specific version of my project, it'll deploy that on any of the available execution servers. And then depending on your architecture, that might just be one big execution server you have to handle all your load. It might be a set of execution servers. You might be able to provision them dynamically, or you might even be delegating all of this to the cloud and say, like, I don't care, just run it in the cloud for me. So this kind of architecture, you have execution servers that will be running separately. And so our monitoring console is now able to connect to any of these execution servers and manage those. So the main difference is that rather than relying on this embedded execution, which has its advantages, but the main disadvantage is like it makes it difficult to then go and check an execution server running somewhere else. So now our management actually allows you to connect to any execution server out there to go and check its current status. The execution server itself is, so it's got a generic foundation, and in there, there's lots of different features. There's process-related features, there's rule-related features, and even for processes, then there's like, okay, there's tasks, there's query, there's lots of capabilities, all easily available through REST APIs to get basically all the information you might need. So for cases, we added an additional set of services that allow you to kind of get the information you need, like what are the current milestones, which kind of ad hoc task can I currently offer as advice given the current situation of the case, etc. So we extended this execution server, but this is definitely our recommended way. I mean, you can still embed the engine, and actually you can embed the engine in the application, or you can say like, I'm just going to integrate with an execution server. If you integrate with the execution server, you got all these components, all these REST APIs available to simply get the information you need. And then finally, task assignment. So this is actually going a little bit into what Jeffrey's going to say about OptaPlanner, but one of the use cases in case management where it's actually more important is to figure out who needs to do certain things. So thanks to Jeffrey for providing these slides, by the way. I didn't create these myself. So assume you have certain employees, and I mean, we do group-based assignment, right? So you're just going to assign a task to a certain group. Anyone in that group could go and claim that task. That's not necessarily the most efficient way. Sometimes there's other things you need to take into account. So first of all, you could, for example, have priorities. You want when someone needs to perform a task, the most important priorities need to be done first, and low priorities should be delayed. So we want to go and schedule tasks and assign tasks to individuals based on, for example, priority. That would be one thing, but there's also skills involved usually. Skills, whether it's language, I mean, literally a skill of I'm familiar with that technology, etc. Is a skill that you absolutely need. You cannot do that task unless you have that skill. So it's useless to try and assign that. So we need to make sure that if we assign tasks, that we assign tasks to people that have the right skill. On top of that, there's what we call affinity. And affinity, you can define yourself what you mean with affinity. But affinity could be how familiar am I with this specific task. So if you're very familiar with it, you're going to be able to quickly run through it. While if you've never done it, you might be able to do it. So it's not a hard constraint, it's a soft constraint. Isn't it? We'll try to find someone who's got a lot of affinity. But if we can't find anyone, we'll take the next best option. But it might take longer. So you can actually take into account that if you have someone who's new, who's never done it before, it might actually take more time to do that. And then you can define your own rules. So there's a lot of things that we can provide out of the box to kind of help you in scheduling tasks, but you can define yourself what it means. So for example, fairness, or things like breaks, or PTO, or etc. There's lots of things that you can try to take into account when you do this scheduling. That's what OptaPlanner will help you do in defining the problem to then find a solution. But so out of the box, we've done a lot of work to kind of allow you to any kind of tasks that you're creating while you're executing processes and cases. They could potentially, if you want to, use different task assignment strategies to make sure that the people are working on the right things. This kind of is also related to things like RPA, not the actual. So if you, I mean, RPA is also a hot topic nowadays. There's depending on how you define it, this kind of falls within RPA as well, which is like making sure that you can assign the task to the right person, whether it's automatic or human tasks, etc. This is part of the solution that we're offering in that context. Yes. Sorry? Yeah, so Jeffrey's going to do Optaplan. It's not going to focus specifically on this use case, so that's why I wanted to mention it, the use case, but the technology, how it works, etc. Jeffrey's going to explain that, yes. You've just found the next slide. So one of the things that we've also done, again, not specifically related to case management, is more an admin API. So these kind of capabilities were available already, but not necessarily through public APIs or through remote APIs. So a lot of these things customers might have been doing, but we now offer APIs to kind of more, as an admin, go in and work with a specific process or case, which would be like canceling any instance, any node instance that is active, or re-triggering one. Again, so this is, I mean, I've always been in doubt of adding this. We decided to add it through the public API. It's extremely dangerous if you start abusing this, because you will, I mean, this is very easy to put a process in a wrong state if you start abusing this. That's why it's an admin API, but we know some of our customers, I mean, they definitely are using this in the right context. Don't abuse this feature, but it allows you to basically jump to any part of the process and start executing there. It's dangerous because you just might have missed anything which we believe you should have done before, but it's very useful in specific use cases as well. Other things, updating timers, triggering random nodes, or in the context of tasks, changing anything related to the task, the data of the task, who's able to claim the task, etc. We already have a life cycle where you can delegate, forward, release, etc. But not as, I mean, this admin can do more. He can literally change who needs to be able to execute certain tasks, etc. All right, so the next step is on the authoring side. So as I mentioned, we've extended our current BPMN2 modeler to support some of these use cases. So for example, ad hoc choice. So if you want to offer ad hoc choice, in this case, I mean, in this example, this healthcare example where you're doing patient treatment, I've used color to kind of indicate that the green one will be automatically triggered. So the green task, the questionnaire, is something that we will always do. And then depending on what the physician thinks, we will offer these options to him. We will offer him to potentially do a blood test to check for certain systems, or if he already knows the diagnosis, he can put in the diagnosis. But it's the physician who will be able to decide this. Or we could possibly interact with a rule which would, for example, say if the patient has like a precondition of a heart disease and is older than 50 years, we always automatically will trigger this one. But the process itself is not in full control. The process will provide options that other technology or the end user can choose which to do. Dynamic modifications, like I said, you can, while you're executing, decide to do something which is not defined here. So if I decide to do an additional investigation, I can do this in the context of this case. The orange blocks are milestones, so they can actually show up as certain milestones you've reached. So I've reached the diagnosis, someone has done an initial diagnosis, or the medication plan has been defined. These are kind of milestones you can reach. And we're also using stages here. I mean, there's a diagnosis stage and a treatment stage. This is a simplified example. Don't expect any kind of diagnosis and treatment to be as simple as this, kind of just to indicate some of the features. But as you see, like even in this context, so this is what we'll call a semi-structured process. There's a lot of structure in here, but within each of those stages, there's some flexibility. This works well in use cases where you have that. So you're still going through a process fairly structured, but there's places where you need some kind of adaptiveness. If you go to much more adaptive use cases where there's actually no structure at all, the best you can do is basically just have a number of process fragments you can choose from. this kind of visualization falls apart. It's very difficult to follow of what you might be able to do. So with the case modeler, we're working towards a higher level visualization that keeps working in that kind of situation as well. So rather than focusing on all the details, we're focusing on the different stages you might have, and there might just be one if you only have one stage, and then within each stage to just visualize what the tasks that you want to do in that context. It's not showing all the details. So if you would translate this into literally only this into a BPMN2 file, it might just look like this. So this is literally, okay, I'm just going to give the option to choose from any of these. When I go to the next phase, only any of these, etc. But you can add a lot of features here. You can use gateways, you can use sequence flows, exception, boundary events, etc. A lot of details, you can extend this. This view doesn't necessarily need to change a lot. So maybe we can annotate this view a little bit so you can figure out what it might be doing. But this is a higher level view. The idea of this view is that you can have an idea of what's going to be happening, but it's a simplified view. It's not showing everything. That might be a higher level view, more towards less technical users, but it's not going to show everything. So the vision that we have is that you can actually switch between both. If you're a less technical user, you just want to do like an initially high level version of the case, or you just want to look at what the case is all about, you can use it. Your hardcore developers who will be implementing a lot of the very detailed complexity, they can use the full BPMN2 model to be able to do to kind of use the capabilities that are available there. And the reason behind it is actually less is more. So one of the goals we like to do is use a visualization which focuses on the most important things. So rather than trying to show everything, we will try to show what we believe is most relevant at a high level. And we will hide some of the complexity. Some of the complexity will actually be in the underlying BPMN2 model. Yes? Yeah. Yeah, so the question is like, how do you expose this? I mean, like the choosing of the options or dynamically adding something to the end user. So I'll get back to that in what we call the custom application. So a lot of the things I'm talking about now is the kind of the out-of-the-box tooling we have for like business analysts, developers, process and task admins, etc. This is not necessarily end-user focused. If you want to offer something to the end user, that's what we would call custom applications, to be able to show that. And I'll show you later how, for example, we have something that allows you to do that, but you can decide how you want to expose that to the end user. Yeah, some of the other authoring improvements that I haven't mentioned. Mark actually mentioned a lot of these. I mean, we've updated the getting started experience on the authoring side. There's a new form modeler. It's basically being now merged as the old one is being replaced. So the new form modeler is going to be the new default. The process modeler is in progress, as in that will not be completely ready in the near future, but we're working towards that as a replacement for the old one as well. And Mark already showed things like the administrative settings, the ability to do much more fine-grained security on who is able to see what in the workbench, etc. Yes. Yeah, so that was already supported in the old form model as well. With the new one, we still support that. So once you've defined data models or processes, and we know the data that's going into a task and maybe going out, we can generate a form that would match that. You can still customize it. You can still decide to add more data, which maybe the process will never use. But based on what you've already defined, we can try to generate a starting point, a form for you, and we'll even try to help you keeping it in sync. So if your process changes and you add additional data, we will notify you that maybe that has happened, so you need to update your form as well, etc. Yeah, so the last part, which is like trying to keep them in sync, is new, because we usually had the one-shot generation. You could still override the old one, but you kind of were manually responsible for keeping them in sync. Now we actually do the analysis of, okay, what are the inputs that a form is expecting and the outputs? What is defined in the process? Is there any mismatch? Are we missing? Has anything been changed since the last time you've opened this form or when you've defined this? To help you evolve your process and your forms in parallel. So you need to keep those in track. We will try to help you with that.
Are you applying a methodology where we define the process first and then refine the forms later, or we could go either way?
So you could go either way. Typically, you would define the data model first. Once you have that, I guess either what typically could happen is you generate forms based on data models, because if the data model is matching the form, that's a fairly easy thing to do. If the form is much more related to the process specifically, then you would typically do the process first and generate a form, or you do them in parallel. That's fine too. Or you can just regenerate a form while you do it. But every time you would open the form or change the process, this kind of logic will be triggered to help you figure that out.
Yeah, that's it.
All right, so the runtime monitoring. So I mean, we've had what we call a monitoring console, monitoring capabilities in the product as well. So to be able to see all the instances, the process instances that are running, and the details, like what's the data, which nodes are active, what's the audit log related to those. And for tasks, what are the tasks I can be working on to complete tasks, etc. So those capabilities are still there. We've extended the kind of capabilities to support some of the more case management use cases. So this is what we call the case management showcase. So it shows some of the capabilities we have. Again, I'll come back to custom applications later, because we don't believe this is what you will be putting into production and offer to your end users. But this is much more for the case owner. He can go and see, okay, what's the current status of my case? And it supports some of the new functionality, like you can look at the milestones. In this case, these are all milestones. None of them have been reached. If they've been reached, they kind of gray out. But you can see, okay, these are the ones I'm expecting. Roles, I mean, who am I working with? Different roles, assigning people to roles, etc. Case comments, just the basic case details, and then actions. This is more traditional audit logs. So this is what's currently active. This is what has been completed. But these are some of the ad hoc and dynamic capabilities. So dynamically, you can add a new task, and then you can either choose between some of the tasks we know, or you can just dynamically create something completely new. And ad hoc is that option. So like we can give you recommendations. These recommendations will show up here as available actions. So these are things that we would recommend you to do based on the current status of the case. You can choose what you want to do.
As far as visualization is concerned, even in an earlier version, we were able to visualize the process instance which was running on the execution server associated with the workbench.
Yeah.
But we were not able to, and maybe we didn't know how to do it, we were not able to point to another execution server and visualize the process instance running on that server, which is not a server, which may be a production instance.
Yeah, so that's actually.
How do we do that?
Yeah, so with the new monitoring console, you can actually do that, because we've separated the execution and we connect to a remote execution. So technically, the capabilities were there on the execution server, but the console was always looking at the engines that it had embedded. So the solution there was to share the database. Then actually you would be able to do that, because the data that the other execution server might have been using would have been reflected in the server you were using locally. Yes, in this case, and I'll show it later, you can literally just click and select and say like, okay, just connect me to that key server. You will see the data. Just connect to another one, and you will see another set of data. All right, so a lot of this, I mean, this is just a composition of what we would call building blocks. So this is just a component that allows you to visualize milestones. If you're using an application where your case is not using milestones, obviously you don't want that as part of your application. It's going to be always empty. Same with all these other things. This is literally just showing the kind of capabilities it has. It's not very specifically tailored to a use case that you might have in mind. And as a result, it's fairly technical and not really for an end user easy to understand, because an end user is usually thinking about other concepts, domain-specific concepts, more about the problem he's trying to solve than about the technology we're using underneath to help him solve this issue. So I'll come back to that in a second with custom applications. One of the some other things, the first one I'll actually show in the demo, we've extended our process and task capabilities, the monitoring capabilities, to make it much more advanced for administrators to use. So we have quick search capabilities. You can link, so like if you're in a process, you can easily link to the tasks that are related to that process. And the task and administration capabilities have been extended significantly as well, but I'll show that in the demo in the afternoon. The other thing we've been working on is error management. So this is related to in case something goes wrong, and I mean technical errors, not about business level errors, so like something went wrong and now the process needs to define what happens. Those are business level exceptions. You need to define that logic as part of your process or your case. Error management is about technical exceptions, like I've tried to contact that server, it failed. There's a timeout, I've retried 3 times and still I don't know anymore what to do. Or I've been executing, there was an exception during execution, the transaction has been rolled back. So at that point it seems as if nothing ever happened, but obviously there was an error. So with error management we keep track of any error that might happen while you're executing, and the administrator can go and look at all of these errors, try to solve them, like maybe re-trigger the same command, or I mean, there's different ways. But so this error management is definitely for administrators to go and figure out. I mean, traditionally they could go and look at the server log to see what went wrong. This kind of pulls it out, makes it a separate set of entities you can use. And then finally, custom applications. So we believe that, I mean, you will be building applications that are for end users. So typically the applications that we have out of the box, they're not what your end users are expecting. That's because we are more technology focused. It's a generic solution that can be applied in lots of different situations. And I mean, you can build verticals on top of that. They get closer and closer to what the end user wants. But custom applications, and in this case, case-driven applications, because we're not just talking any kind of application. I'm talking about applications that are going to rely on the BPM system to execute some of the logic there in the case. We want to make sure that you can build these applications as easy as possible and take advantage of all of the capabilities that we have. But those applications are, well, first of all, they're end-user focused, so they need to be close to what your user wants. They don't need to be close to what the technology is using underneath. They're typically focused to only a small set of use cases. So for example, internally we've got an application that allows us to do expenses. It doesn't do anything else than allow me to put in expenses and see where they are, what the process is. It's a very specific use case. It's a small application, but it's solving that well. And it's using very domain-specific terminology and visualization to allow me to quickly do that. It's not a generic solution. It's solving one specific use case well. And the other goal is ease of use. So rather than trying to align with technology or figuring out, make one big application that does everything well, no, we just want to offer you the ability to create a very custom, specific application to do one thing well. If you can solve that issue, then at least that issue, your end users will be happy, and then you can move on to solving other applications as well. And this is what I'll be demoing. So this is a hardware ordering application. So all it allows me to do is order a new laptop. And this is the zoomed in version, but it's actually using exactly the same. I'll actually show the same process running in the monitoring tooling and then the end user app. This end user app is actually very easy to understand. Depending on who you are, you can, I mean, in this case, there's different people, but if I log in, first I can get a hardware specification of what I need. There's going to be a manager approving it, and then at some point it'll be shipped to me. This is something that an end user can easily understand. It's not something specific. Even though it's using things like milestones, in this case, these are just milestones. These are just the case roles. I mean, I can do like an attachment of the hardware specification, which is a file that is in the case file, but the user doesn't need to know. The user doesn't care. He just wants to look at specifically only the information that is relevant to him. So this kind of custom application is actually fairly easy to build because all it needs to do is it needs to get the information from the underlying key server. Everything's there. It's easily accessible through REST. So this is a very basic Angular.js application that is just reaching out to the BPM server to get the information it needs, to visualize it, and then when you try to do something, like if you want to close the case, it'll send that information into the underlying execution servers as well. So this kind of solution is what we want to work towards. We want to make it easier for you to build these applications. One, by providing all these powerful REST APIs so you can easily get the information you need and talk to the server in case something happens. But also, and that's probably something more of vision over time, is to start building out these UI components you can use. Because, I mean, a UI component and that just lists participants and allows you to change assignments, etc., is something that you can actually start using in different cases, in different custom applications for you. So Alex will go into that as well on how you can build different kinds of custom applications. Whether you just build your own application and use our REST APIs, but over time we want to do what we call low-code application building, so you can just pick and choose some of the components and build applications like that, and then maybe just customize that initial version. So whether you're just going to build end-user applications on top of our platform, we actually want to go the step further and help you in building smaller end-user applications, by which I mean less effort to build them, but because we are actually providing more capabilities out of the box. And another advantage of this is that it allows you to do much more rapid application development. So one of the challenges is that technology doesn't sell well. Technology doesn't solve an issue. So if you want to sell an idea of like, this is what we want to do, you need to be able to sell the end user value, because that's what you're trying to achieve. If you have to spend a lot of time in building this completely custom application, you've lost the opportunity in quickly showing where you want to work towards. So with these custom applications can easily, because they're actually fairly simple, because a lot of the heavy lifting is done in the back end, you can even generate an initial version of this application. So based on what we see in your case, we can almost generate a basic app for you. It allows you to log in. It allows you to just see your current cases and interact with them, showing some of the capabilities. That you can then customize, because it's not going to be what you want. Let's be clear, the initial application is again going to be very generic, but maybe the only effort that you need to do is focus on that one screen, make that screen very appealing. The basic application itself is there. So you can much more easily go to, let's start with a basic model, deploy that, and have a small custom application that shows the value, that shows what we're working towards. It's not going to be full. It's just going to be one small, tiny thing, but it's going to show where you want to go towards. And then go back and say, like, OK, now let's improve the model, add more capabilities, etc. So it's this more, you can easily show where you want to go towards by having custom applications early in your development cycle as well.
Question.
Yes.
Previously, we've been using jBPM 6, and the challenges in building custom applications was the granularity of the API queries. So you couldn't, for instance, query easily, give me all business processes where the process variable equals something.
Yeah.
And so we actually ended up putting an Elasticsearch layer, because the APIs were not useful. Have you done a lot more with the APIs?
Yeah, so that was, I think in 6.3, if I remember correctly. So we've included a feature what we call custom queries. So we have we have some basic out-of-the-box queries, but that's literally limited to fairly simple use cases. If you want to go much more advanced use cases, typical examples are like, if it's like related to order entry, you want to search based on the amount of the order or the customer that's related to the order. That kind of information is not necessarily easy to solve because it's usually also domain specific. Custom queries allow you to first of all, include custom data into your query. So you can say, like, my process has an order. I want to store basic information about the order, like the amount, the customer related to it, etc., in a database table as well, so I can easily query it, because just doing it on the out-of-the-box tables is not going to, even if you could, it's not going to be performant. So we allow you to store that in an efficient way. So then in the next step, you can go and query it in any way possible. So you can actually, with custom queries, define any query, even all the way up to using database-specific features if you want to. I mean, probably you don't, I mean, you will.
I think the bigger related to that was the performance of the
Yeah, so that's why the first step is absolutely necessary. If you just try to build complex queries on the out-of-the-box data model, it will not perform well. So you need to be able to do performant queries on the database level. We allow you to do that, and we allow you to define the query to the tiniest detail to make it behave as performant as if you would just literally write the query yourself.
I don't know if this is related. I could talk about how in 7 you have the option of moving away from a relational database to a document database as the underlying data structures, right?
Well, for any data you have, we have what we call pluggable variable persistence. So internally, we're using a SQL database to store the data we need for execution. Pluggable variable persistence allows you to extract some of that data somewhere else. Like a document is a typical example. You don't want to store the document in the BPM system. You have a document management system which keeps tracks of that.
Document database like a MongoDB or
Yeah, so we allow you to store data anywhere. And one of the things we're currently looking at is like NoSQL databases where so that's the kind of queries you mentioned. We will provide you advanced queries, but it will have a limit. As in, we do not want to become a big database. We want you to be able to find the processes and the tasks using even domain-specific custom business data. We do not want to collect all the information. So integration with the NoSQL, Magic has done some blogs about it recently, is about pushing the data related to the process execution into like a NoSQL, querying it there. And then over time, we actually see that as an option of even becoming the very high-level initial overview of everything. Like if let's assume you're managing hundreds and hundreds of projects, but you still want to get that aggregated view, then something like a NoSQL can definitely help in getting that view. It will not allow you to continue execution based on that information, but it allows you to find then the right place where you then need to go for execution.
For the custom queries you mentioned, I'm assuming that you have in your make them performant, you have kind of pulled out some of the variables from your blocks and kind of flattened them in some kind of relation structure.
Yeah, so out of the box, in the audit tables, you have what we call the two-string version. So like if you use data, just normal data types, it contains all the information. If you have something more complex, it's just a snapshot, a short snapshot of what that data is. So it doesn't allow you to query that efficiently. So yes, the solution there is to put basic information that you need for querying in a separate table. And to be honest, it's very easy to do. If you define the data model, all you need to do is that data model, which is like maybe all the data that you need for query purposes, click it and say like it needs to be persisted. And we will create a separate table with that information, and it's going to be very trivial for you to then use that in your queries. So it's.
If you define the data model in the workbench, you will ask us to specify a special flag.
Yeah.
And that you will use to.
Yeah, so if you mark it as persistible, then we will automatically make sure that whenever it's changed, it ends up in that database, and then you can query it efficiently.
And my final question is, what about analytics? Average throughput time of my cases.
Yeah, so
Bounce time.
yeah, this.
Out-of-the-box analytics capability.
Something that we're currently started working. So we didn't have anything. We haven't done anything recently for that. What we're working on is like a scenario simulation tool. That is definitely related to that. Analytics itself is kind of. I mean, really the analytics of. I mean, loop detection and that path detection, etc. That's almost like a separate technology. But
Business analytics, where as an organization, I'm going to monitor the productivity of an operator or the average case time, so that I can those kind of things.
yeah, so I mean, we have the analytics, so the dash builder. I mean, we're renaming that, but kind of that we have dashboards that look at the data we store out of the box in the audit logs, etc., and extracts that kind of information. So that has information about average execution times and tasks assigned to different users, etc. Those are out-of-the-box dashboards that we have. We do expect you to build your own dashboards, whether it's based on only the information we already have or just add information from somewhere else. So you could have other information that you want to combine with that information to build those components. So out of the box, we have a few reports that will show you some of the typical things people might be interested in, like the throughput, how many instances are still active versus how many were completed, etc. Those kind of capabilities. It has the capability of defining your own reports to kind of zoom in on whatever you wanna show. A lot of that data is probably already available. Like in the audit logs, there's tons of information that you can just extract. If not, again, the pluggable variable persistence allows you to structure your data and create additional tables that will make it easier for you later then to query those, to create reports that will show whatever you need.
If I need to do a query like give me all my cases and the status in which they are, etc., I will have to write a query for that.
That's all those things are definitely out of the box.
Static things are
Yeah, so I mean, if the custom queries would be if you would like to search for something that is not supported out of the box, but out of the box, basic queries like just status or the value of one variable, things like that. That's possible with the out of the box, but they don't. I mean, not any kind of random complexity of queries. For more complex stuff, the solution is to go towards custom queries. Right. Yeah, so the demo part is actually in the afternoon. So this the first half hour in the afternoon I'll run through the demo, but I guess we'll wrap up here.
Thanks very much, Chris.